Hey, Michael Dermer here from The Lonely Entrepreneur. And, we get asked all the time, like, what are the books you would read as an entrepreneur? Now, obviously, I'm biased because I wrote one, and you guys all know The Lonely Entrepreneur for those of you who hadn't read it before. But all kidding aside, I'm actually not going to list out 5 or 10 books. I'm actually going to just give you one. And I really believe that the one book that every entrepreneur should read isn't really even about entrepreneurship. It's a book called The Art of War by Sun Tzu. So here's the mini version of it. The Art of War is actually a voluminous book that has packed within it just an amazing set of principles and guidelines that give the opportunity for an organization that has less resources to be able to achieve. Now, in the context of what Sun Tzu was writing about, that was obviously war. But these concepts can be applied to what we're doing in entrepreneurship, right? So think about what I described, an organization that has less resources. Well, that's all of us when we get started, right? And yet we're looking at, especially in this day and age, bigger and faster competitors, right? We're looking at people that have more money. We're looking at people that are further along, and we wake up with that every single day. Well, Sun Tzu was able to defeat a much, much, much larger army by using many of the techniques that have become laid out in this amazing book called The Art of War. And so I really strongly encourage each of you to, first of all, read the whole thing, which is much longer than the small version, but also get the small version of it. So why is that? Okay. Think of the basic premise, right? The basic premise is that there is an army that is bigger, okay? More resources, that is defeated by an army that is smaller. And you say, well, how do you go about doing that, right? And there's a series of techniques that are demonstrated and laid out in the book, which you have to think of as you're starting to develop your business. So let's talk about a couple of them. Number one is you have to not attack their strengths, okay? You have to figure out a way to not go head to head with their strengths. If they have a bigger military and you go right at their strengths, it's going to be very hard to do. So I'll give you an example from my old business. As many of you know, we started the first company in the US to reward people for being healthy. And this had never been done before. And so we were very excited about the opportunity to be able to have an impact on society. But what loomed over our heads was that there were already big loyalty programs out there, credit card and airline and hotel. And these big loyalty programs were run by big companies. So we're like, okay, we'll go start this in healthcare and people will earn incentives and rewards like points programs, and they'll be able to use them for things. But we could work on that for a year or two, and they already have these reward platforms and they have all these corporate relationships. So we said to ourselves, how do we not attack them on their strengths? And what we realized was that a lot of these companies that provided these reward programs made their money on the actual reward that somebody received. So back many years ago, they might receive a television, a trip to Tahiti, actual things, right? And they would buy the television for $200 and put it in a reward program for $600. So if you looked at their financial statement, all of their earnings almost were the spread on the actual reward. And they used to write these papers about how cash did not work as a reward, that the television that you stood at every day or the trip you went on was much more motivating. And we didn't come from the industry. We're like, that seems silly. And then we realized why. It was because they made all their money on the reward. And if they ever transition to cash or like cash equivalents, like a gift card or a debit card, they wouldn't be able to make the margin on their reward. So when we launched our program, we went in and we said, we believe that the best reward that you should give is a cash or a cash equivalent. And so these competitors these are multi-billion-dollar competitors that ran these reward programs. They literally never went after the healthcare industry. Even to this day, we're in the year 2022. We're 20 years later, because the standard in the healthcare industry, even though my company has been sold to someone else and they've taken the standard in the healthcare industry is that you have to reward people with cash or cash equivalent. So what we did is we didn't just go after their strength, right? We found their weakness, right? And we exploited their weakness, okay? So there are so many techniques, right, in the art of war that you can apply to use like this. Let's give you a couple others. A lot of times a competitor will be doing things, or you'll see something going on in the marketplace, and your tendency is to show them all the good things that you're doing, and the tendency is for them to see all the good things you're doing. Well, actually, a lot of times, one of the best things you do is to seem to be kind of disorganized, right? And that you don't have all your act together because you can stay below the radar screen. And they're like, we're not really gonna bother with those guys. And then obviously you can emerge with going down the battlefield with anybody without anybody noticing. And I know that to a certain extent is a little bit counterintuitive, because you're like, well, wait a minute, we have to act like we have our act together, and the world has to see us, right, as doing these different types of things. Okay, so just some different things about ways to apply that, right? And as you go through the art of war, you see all these different types of techniques. So I'll give you another one. One of the things they say about the art of war is that all of war is deceit, right? Remember, when you're at a disadvantage, okay, you have to be deceptive. And that doesn't mean be dishonest, right? But you have to be deceptive because there's people with more time and more money and more resources that you have, right? So a lot of times you have to tinker with the way you do things to give yourself an advantage. I'll give you an example. When we were first building our healthcare company, in addition to doing gift cards and all those types of things, this is in the middle of the dot-com era, so we're going back a bunch of years. There were all the dot-coms that were popping up. And one of the dot-coms that popped up was a company called giftcertificates.com. And the idea was that you would be able to buy gift certificates from anywhere in the world on this one site. And our whole business, the structure and the strategy, I should say, was not to go after the consumer. It was to go after healthcare, right? And to have people reward people and then get things like gift certificates and rewards. So we got contacted by giftcertificates.com, that, like a lot of the .com companies, had just raised a whole bunch of money. And they said, we'd like to meet. We said, okay. So I met with the founder and a couple of their investors. And they said, in no uncertain terms, you're going to be out of business in a year. They're like, we just raised whatever it was, X million dollars. We got an amazing team, and we're doing advertising everywhere, and no one is going to pay attention to gift certificates except at giftcertificates.com. Now, what I could have said to them is, no, our strategy is healthcare, and we'll go here and here and here. But I didn't. And I said, listen, all due respect, we're going head to head with you. We believe that the consumer wants gift certificates. We believe that there's lots of places to play here. We've got a bunch of strategic relationships, and we're going to go head to head with you in the consumer market. So best of luck, and go from there. And so we, every once in a while, would do a press release or whatever, but our whole strategy was around the healthcare market. Okay. Now, what happened? The consumer.coms crashed, right? Those businesses, none of those, not just giftcertificates.com, but many others, right, didn't survive. And we had very quietly, behind the scenes, built a business strategically aligned to healthcare. Okay. So I'm not doing the book justice, because there are so many times where you are using somebody's strengths against them. And I'll give you another example of that. In my healthcare company, our customers were health plans, big health plans. So if you know anything about health plans, they're really good at a lot of things, but one of the things they're really good at is negotiating, because they negotiate with doctors and pharmaceutical companies to get the lowest cost for medical services and for drugs and things like that. And so, I had the benefit of being a mergers and acquisitions lawyer, but still, these are really sophisticated companies. And as an early stage company, you're trying to win business, right? You really want it, right? And so when you go into these negotiations, you really want the business. And what we found was that even when they said, okay, we're going to give you the business, when we got to the lawyers, they would beat us up. And every time we said no or tried to push back on things that we thought were unreasonable, they would threaten to walk away, right? And they had all this power by virtue of being a big customer. At the time, we were a pretty small company. So we're like, well, how do we change this dynamic? And so what we realized was that in healthcare, a lot of the solutions that get rolled out in the fall, right? So many of you who have worked for big companies, in October, you pick your health plan. So what health organizations do is over the course of the early fall and the late summer, they put in new stuff. Like that's when they put in new stuff. So they need to contract for those new things and have that stuff done over the summer so they can have, August and September to work on it and then to roll it out to their members, like things like incentive programs. So a lot of times the decision to use this would happen in March, and we would negotiate our contracts in April, and they would kill us. And we'd walk away going, we don't even think we have a deal. We think they could terminate in like 10 days, right? And what we started to realize is we had absolutely no strength. So what did we do? We used their strength against them. And we did it this way. Big companies have lots and lots of resources, but they move slow. And so what we did was we would stall. We would push back the contract negotiations. And when you work for a big company, you move slow, right? So a lot of times you use that slow moving against them. So they were happy to say, okay, we'll push it back 2 weeks. We'll push it back 2 weeks. Now all of a sudden, instead of it being April, now it's July. And their business people are saying to their lawyers, where's the contract? We have to get started. And now it's July. And when they would push back and we would push back again, instead of saying, we're going to terminate you, they would go back to the business people and the business would say, we need this in 2 weeks. And so we used the fact that they were slow moving against them to give us an advantage. Okay. I strongly suggest, if not the full version, get the mini version. One of the most interesting experience I ever had, I was in Charleston, South Carolina. I was in a restaurant. I was looking at the ceiling, and there's all these words written on the ceiling. And we asked the maitre d', what is it? And they're like, it's the art of war. There's a restaurant called Five Church. It's now in a bunch of cities, I think Charlotte, Nashville, Atlanta, and a couple of others, where the art of war is actually written on the ceiling. And so that's when it solidified for me that is the one book that everybody should read, of course, in addition to Lonely Entrepreneur. But I think if you read it, the circumstances that you come through, and I'm not doing it justice, the circumstances that you will come through where you feel like you're at a disadvantage, you will be able to take those circumstances and apply some of the techniques in this book to try to give you an advantage when you don't think you have one. Okay. These are all the things that we all work on together. Like we always say, we're all lonely entrepreneurs. And the key is, okay, we all have passion, and how do we turn that passion into success? And hopefully these types of guidance and tools and techniques and things like the art of war are one of the things that can help you get there.